Hey, hello. Greetings. Welcome to another Educator Innovator Hangout on Air. Today is Wednesday, October 1, 2014, and all of us here at Educator Innovator are really happy to be part of Connected Educator Month once again. Now, for all of you, if you're joining us as part of Connected Educator Month, and if that's how it is that you're joining us, we want you to know that Educator Innovator is a network of organizations and practitioners who are working together to create connected classrooms and to power education in the future. If you're joining us from the Educator Innovator community, then we'd love to share with you a link with a post that'll tell you all about what Connected Educator Month is. So welcome and join us, and here we are kicking off a month-long celebration of connection among teachers and among classrooms. Now, I'm your host, Elise Eidman-Adol. I'm at the National Writing Project. National Writing Project's the home for the Educator Innovator Network, a group we sometimes call EI. And together with our EI partners, we're going to be kicking off a theme here for Connected Educator Month. And that theme is about student agency, student voice, and the maker movement. Tonight's webinar is a kickoff for that theme. Joining me tonight are a number of colleagues from the network that are going to be talking about how this theme relates to their work with their young people in their classrooms, and we're going to hear from them a little bit later. They include Laura Bradley, who's from the Bay Area Writing Project, a middle school teacher, Kim Douillard, an elementary school teacher and director of the San Diego Area Writing Project, Joe Paraiso, Oakland high school teacher at Fremont High School and involved with youthvoices.net, and National Writing Project's own Paul O. And together we're going to be talking about these elements of our theme: student voice, student agency, and the maker movement. So just to give a sense of what you're going to talk about, everybody, if we could do a quick go around, introduce yourself and give us a little sense of what it is that you're going to talk about in the webinar here today. And actually, Kim, let's kick off with you.
Okay. My name is Kim Douillard, like Elise said, and I'm the director of the San Diego Area Writing Project, and I'm also a classroom teacher. I teach in a multi-age class with first, second, and third graders, all in the same classroom. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about how to build connected learning, particularly with primary students, how it works in my classroom, and how we get from the start of the year to actually reaching out beyond our classroom.
Laura, how about you?
Hi, I'm Laura Bradley. I teach 8th grade English and digital media, and I'm here to talk about National Novel Writing Month, better known as NaNoWriMo.
That's great. Joe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Paraiso, and I teach all 12th graders currently here at Fremont High in English. And what I'll be talking about tonight is the students making their work public on their blogs and what that means for their investment in their work.
Great. And Paul, sort of co-hosting with me. Paul.
Hi, Elise. My name is Paul O., as you said, and I work for the National Writing Project, and I will be talking in general terms about the theme, student agency and voice.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, everybody who's watching at home. Or from your schools or classrooms or wherever you might be. Thanks for joining us. Now, one more thing before we get started. If you're watching this Hangout on the Educator Innovator blog page, we really encourage you to go ahead and jump into the chat room. You should see a chat room there. Converse with others who are watching. We'll be posting links to resources and things that get mentioned in the webinar tonight, so go ahead and go there. And if you're watching somewhere else, we're going to post the chat room URL on the screen, so keep an eye out for that. Okay. First, you mentioned you were going to be talking a bit about the theme, Paul, so let's start with you. And a little thinking about this theme of student agency, student voice, and the maker movement. Probably no surprise to anybody that the National Writing Project would be really interested in hosting this theme, because anybody who's about writing and student media is going to be interested probably in student voice and agency and making things. These are all things we make. That's what we're trying to cultivate. But actually, for Connected Educator Month, we wanted to talk about, right, how this theme has really kind of taken on all new dimensions with digital tools and connected technologies. So would you preview a bit of that?
Sure, absolutely, Elise. You're completely right about the affordances today based on these new digital tools and technologies. So I would say that from my perspective in today's classrooms, we see the power of openly networked platforms to really provide a place for young people to publish, but also to engage with others and to disseminate and circulate their ideas, really with the possibility of creating impact. So I think in connected classrooms, first of all, it's really much easier to leverage the kinds of spaces where young people can have a voice, from blogging spaces, which we'll hear more about later, to platforms that allow for the development of videos and other multimedia, to social media spaces like Twitter. But I think even more importantly than that, it's becoming very difficult these days to separate the notion of agency and voice from this idea of action and impact as a result of just what's possible via the internet, these circulation possibilities. When young people create something, it's not just simply that they've created a thing, but it's the ability to disseminate that idea, their thinking, to others through these kinds of platforms. And I would argue, and I think Joe will also speak to this later, that in our democracy, which is increasingly leveraging these tools of the open web, giving our young people this kind of agency and voice with the tools and possibilities to have impact is really critical for their future as full and active participants in our media-rich culture. And I would just add that, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Elise.
Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that beyond this idea of impact, just circling back to what I had talked about originally, this rich array of possibilities, I think that the very notion of what it means to write today, and you and I have had many conversations along these lines, and I know we've had many conversations with others about this, but just the whole notion of what it means to write is being influenced by the kinds of composing possibilities we see available to young people today. And just to pass along a story, I was at an EdCamp event. So for those of you who don't know, EdCamp is billed as an unconference, and they exist all over the country. EdCamp is a partner and educator innovator. And I was at a local EdCamp, San Francisco, the EdCamp SFA, I should say, and that was in August. And in one of the sessions, teachers were talking about the use of this tool, Voxer, which is a walkie-talkie app, and how the teachers had put this Voxer app in the hands of their kids, asked them to download this app, and I guess many kids have downloaded it already anyway. And the way in which they were using the app was to encourage conversation among these students about a variety of topics, but in this one particular example, it was about discussing books that they were reading in their English class. And what was really fascinating was that the teachers talked about the way in which this app made it possible for these young people to have these conversations whenever they wanted, 24/7. The conversations didn't just happen in school. So it's this asynchronous, essentially voice-activated system, where young people literally have a voice, and where these kids have the opportunity to engage by the creation of these digital audio artifacts 24/7. So I think possibilities like that, I think, are really pushing our understanding even of what it means to write today.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that given our theme over the course of the whole month, we might be playing with some ideas about how voice also shows up in writing, also shows up in the things that we make, that we're agents when we make, and these tools all connect us to kind of civic life and the opportunity for impact, and just the ways you were saying. And I'm thinking that some of those themes are themes that now, in 2014, that educators have been talking about for a while. We're now sort of well into the digital revolution here. It's now become commonplace and ubiquitous for many people. So folks have been talking about this, for example, at the Digital Is website for a very long time. I think there was a time when we sort of maybe thought that the tools would do the work. We could just get kids into these tools and then some magic would happen. But I think that we're now seeing that magic doesn't just happen because technology gets brought into a classroom or handed out to young people. It certainly doesn't happen for all young people that way. Would you say a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Your question really reminds me of a description I once heard someone give to this idea of of providing tools to educators and to young people without providing opportunities for educators to engage in a better understanding of their practice in relation to those tools. It's kind of like, giving a kid a car without actually teaching them essentially how to operate that tool, the car. And we would never do something like that. We would always want to think about the implications of a tool and how that tool might be used, and then to provide support in the use of that tool. So with that in mind, I think you're exactly right. Pedagogy is always critical, and considering the kinds of writing and composing and making practices that we engage our young people in, to have that critical lens is always, I would say, is always the task that we educators have before us. And so, just as an example, it occurs to me that, it could be possible, for instance, to ask a young person to write a 5-paragraph essay using an offline word processing program supported by, some of the tools that I used when I was younger, like a cloth-bound encyclopedia. And then, to take an online tool like a blogging platform and have them publish their essay. But would that be giving them, that young person, an opportunity to exercise her or his voice, to have agency, to be a maker? I would argue no. That actually, what we want to understand and be able to encourage are opportunities that allow that young person to collaborate with peers, to receive guidance from mentors, to make something that really has relevance and is intended for a real audience. All the while recognizing that this work can and does happen both in school and out, like with the Voxer example, or I know Laura's going to talk later about National Novel Writing Month. So much of that work, I think, is fueled by what happens outside of school. So I think that, alongside this notion that giving educators an opportunity to inquire into their practice so that they can get to that place of understanding how to provide an opportunity like that, is really critical. And I realize complex, but I think it speaks to your question of, it's not simply about handing over a tool, it's about thinking more broadly.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we'll be able to do in this webinar is have people be able to tease some of these things apart. I think we're going to hear about some opportunities that clearly technology has given us, the affordances of the internet and other kinds of technology, but we're really, in this theme, searching for something different in terms of voice and agency and what it means to be a maker. So that's a great point. And I love that example, actually, because I can imagine that there may be some places where, where the encyclopedia is sitting next to the internet terminal and that sort of thing, because we're in schools, we're in institutions that already exist, buildings that are already made. Schools haven't really changed all that much, so we have, several decades of an internet revolution, but we have the same buildings in many cases, and the same desks and the same kinds of setups. And in many cases, the timing of the school day hasn't much changed, and bells ring in certain ways, those kinds of things. So we're trying to fit often these new practices into something, into a box that precedes us by a couple of 100 years. So, Paul, we see that all the time as a challenge for folks.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And I think, we often hear, as you mentioned, the stories that Digital is of the teachers who are overcoming those challenges. And in fact, through Educator Innovator, we have crowdsourced a list of the challenges that educators face and overcome on a day-to-day basis. So the kinds of challenges that educators experience as they're trying to make the most of connected learning and student voice and agency. So what's interesting about the challenges actually that we crowdsource, they really range from educators, as you can imagine, and I'm sure if we had more time in this conversation, the educators on this call would be able to come up with their own set of challenges, but they range from having enough time to engage deeply in their own practice and their own professional learning, and as well to overcoming, as you were talking about, the barriers of time and space. And so Educator Innovator, just so that people know, is in the midst of a challenge that we put forward to solicit creative solutions to the time-space issue. And what we're fully expecting is that the solutions will likely include an innovative use of tools. Tools is definitely a part of this, because we recognize that tools, both analog and digital, are critical and always have been critical in a production-centered environment, because I think that is what we're talking about here, particularly as it relates to making. I think as well with regard to student agency and voice. It's through that creative making process that students, I think, gain agency and have a voice. But I would say as important, if not more so than the tools, is an embrace of an expanded notion of when learning happens, as we were talking about, or when it can happen and where. So teachers, particularly these teachers on this call, are some of the most creative people I know. And I know that given the opportunities to consider these possibilities, like the notion that school is really just, say, one node in a vast learning ecosystem for a young person, that they're going to come up with amazing ideas and amazing solutions.
Yeah, we need to get to some of those and hear some of our guests talk about those. And I love that phrase. It's a phrase in connected learning we use a lot, that school is just one node, an important node, but just one node in a young person's learning network or in their ecosystem. So let's hold on to that idea as well. But Kim, I want to bring you in if we could, especially around the space-time challenge. I have, back in my past, I was a high school teacher for a while, and so I really know the tyranny of the bells. It rang every 55 minutes in my teaching practice, and and then off they went, and in came another group. And I often thought of my elementary colleagues like you, what it must have been to have this room and to have all this time that you could work with young people and make and remake it and do what you wanted. But I hear that actually that's not necessarily how people experience elementary school as teachers, with pacing guides and all those other sorts of things. So it feels like the pressures of time and space for real voice and agency are as tough for all of us as teachers, and demand some creative solutions. So talk to us about that. How do you manage to do the kind of work that really values voice and agency in your room?
Great question, because the issues of time and space are the issues I think we deal with most. And as an elementary teacher, I don't just teach English. I teach everything. Everything from reading and spelling and art and writing and science and social studies, and you name it, we teach it. And then, of course, we want. I will always talk as we, because I actually co-teach my class, so double-sized number of students and 2 teachers in there, which also gives us great flexibility with both space and time because there's 2 adults in the room. But we're really working to get our students actively involved in being producers of learning, of knowledge, of stuff. And when we think connected learning, we are often thinking about all of those digital tools, but we often find in a primary classroom that we actually need to start with some hands-on materials and learning to connect to each other. And so we spend time doing those kinds of things. We've been working on design already. We started on our very first day of school with a make. We called it a mini make, because it only took a small amount of time, but then we found out that we needed a second iteration already because our material, which happened to be aluminum foil, was a little more challenging to work with than you might have expected. Adult, it doesn't seem so hard. When you're 6, try to get it to do what you want it to do is a little more challenging. So this idea of design and iteration and of learning from not only your own results, but from those of people around you. And it's critically important, and we're seeing how our students are taking ideas from each other and using those to build their knowledge. They're adding to their repertoire in that way. And we're really working to be a community of learners together, and then working towards reaching out. So we take advantage of some of those broader kinds of opportunities, like we just passed International Dot Day. So our students got quite involved in the creation of dots and the idea of making their mark. They did some some making of dots, that we created a display, and we did a collaborative piece of writing that then we shared with the world through a Twitter account. And so students are already starting to know what I do here can connect with what other people are doing, and I can see what they're doing in their spaces as well.
And Kim, Dot Day is so wonderful, and Fable Vision and Dot Day are Educator Innovator partners. If for folks who don't know the book, maybe they haven't encountered the book, could you tell the story of Dot Day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing better than Peter Reynolds to get the idea that you don't have to be perfect at something in order to participate. And his idea of the child who felt like she wasn't an artist and was encouraged to make her mark by just making a dot on a piece of paper, and then realizing, oh, I can make more than that dot. I can make this dot and the other dot, and I can make a dot that isn't a dot. And you know, that whole idea that we can get close and we can learn from our efforts. I don't even want to say mistakes, but I think we learn from our efforts, and this effort leads to the next effort. And his other book, Ish, which is a favorite in our class, that I can make a tree that's kind of tree-ish, or flower-ish, or vase-ish, really helps, particularly my young students, take those risks and try something that they don't feel entirely comfortable with. So that's kind of the dot thing in a nutshell.
I love it, and I think that probably we're going to hear some of these same themes and language as we go up the grades, but it strikes me, I believe you're probably using this language right there in your classroom, that you're talking to those 6-year-olds about being creators and iterating, and let's just do another draft and let's see what other people think about it, and the whole atmosphere of making, and there's never a reason to treat them another way. They don't have to learn later to be makers. You're just treating them that way at the beginning.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's just this idea that they have agency. They bring skills and talents and ideas and capabilities, whoever they are, with them to the learning experience, and we just want them to keep building on that and taking advantage of it. And we have another thing that we started already is we started working with coding, the idea of programming in the classroom. And we're not connected quite to anybody yet other than ourselves, but we can connect to others through this process. And I think I hope that the middle school and high school teachers, even in this webinar, are thinking, wow, well, what would happen if my students started in high school?
So you did talk before a bit about how, bit by bit, creating community in the classroom and connecting with others. And so this theme of the connected classroom, could you talk a little bit more about sort of those expanding connections that it seemed you were suggesting before?
Well, we're working towards being bloggers, which is something that we've been doing in our classroom for a few years now, where once our students get enough fluency with writing and typing, which is one of the things you need to do in order to be a blogger, we will start them blogging, where they then have this broad audience, which tends to be a lot of their own family members at the beginning and each other, which is still another audience. But they also start to reach out. Last year, we had a student share a piece of writing she'd written inspired by a mentor text by a published author. And that published author actually read her blog post on that and came on to her blog and commented on it. And that kind of connection is so powerful for students, and they see then that their writing is out there in the world and that it matters beyond just the classroom or just themselves. And that authenticity of audience also encourages them to go past maybe what they would do for a classroom assignment. It gives them those real purposes. Why do you need to know math? Why do you need to learn how to write? Why do we read? What are all those reasons beyond sort of that's what first graders do or that's what second graders do? And I think that's a really important piece of learning, is that we're all learners. I mean, and we're sharing with our students that as adults, we're still learning. And I'm a connected learner as well outside of my classroom, and making connections to educators and learners actually all over the world. Kind of fun this summer in the Connected Learning MOOC to be connecting to people outside our country who are then pushing my thinking, giving me new ideas. I'm inspiring their ideas. We're sharing resources in our own classrooms, in our own spaces, in our own lives that, you know, inspire what I go back into my classroom with.
It's fabulous. I think we're gonna let's move up the grades a bit. I love that note of inspiration, and I can absolutely see those young people in your room. But we're going to move up to middle school now, and I want to say before we do, Laura, we're going to bring you in a second, that that we have a question from the chat room, and I'm going to name because it might actually be something that you all can work into your remarks. And the question is, sometimes young people are not used to teachers asking them to use their voice and asking them to share. They may be shy or they may be reluctant, and I'm sure that we've all seen that as well. And some interest in how we scaffold that. And I think actually, Laura, NaNoWriMo is maybe going to be an opportunity at a couple points for you to talk about how to scaffold that. We can see that kind of shyness or reluctance at any point in time, but middle school, I think middle school is a time when some of us might have said, yeah, I don't know if I want to speak up right now. So this might be a good time to introduce that question. Laura, so let's bring you in because you're a middle school teacher, but you're also, as you said, you're going to talk about this amazing thing, talk about inspiration, talk about a challenge. You have your students working in NaNoWriMo, which is an amazing example to me of both what digital media and new affordances can do. NaNoWriMo couldn't have existed in a way without the internet and without digital media. On the other hand, novel writing is an old and time-worn practice by now. Bringing those two things together creates this amazing soup. So could you tell us a little bit what NaNoWriMo is, just in case we have listeners that haven't experienced it?
Sure. So NaNoWriMo is write a novel in the month of November. Adult writers take on a 50,000 word goal. But students get to choose their own goal. So with some coaching from me, we figure out what's an appropriate goal for them. We spend September and October brainstorming, outlining, developing characters and conflicts, and then the whole month of November is spent writing novels, both classwork and homework.
And your students, you have middle school students.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of the question that was asked. So basically they come into your room, they meet their new English teacher, it's back to school time, and they find out they're going to write a novel in the month of November.
Right. So, fourth year that we've done NaNoWriMo at my school. And so now the kids come in already knowing, which is really exciting. A lot of them come in saying they already know their story, it's something they've wanted to do for a long time, and so the rumors are out there, and the kids are often pretty excited about it. But
that's also, I think, that's part of an answer to the question, too. You've built up a culture over a couple of years.
Yes. Yes, and I'm not the only teacher. All the 8th grade teachers here do NaNoWriMo, so we have almost 500 students who write novels.
Okay, so some people probably are saying, I need to get a concrete picture of what this is like, 500 students writing a novel in the month of November. Take us right into that kind of concretely.
Okay, so fortunately the Young Writers Program provides curriculum. There's workbooks for all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high school, and there's enough curriculum that we could really do this for an entire school year. So right now my students are working in the planning stages, so they're figuring out who their characters are, what kind of a story they want to write. We start by talking about the books they love to read. They often will do fan fiction. One girl's writing a prequel right now to a very popular novel. Our school just went one-to-one Chromebooks, and so my students all have Chromebooks. So I'm converting the workbook into Google Docs because it isn't accessible that way right now, and that has made a huge difference for the kids to brainstorm into text boxes that enlarge as they go instead of writing on paper where it's too cramped. And so the classroom's kind of noisy right now. I let the kids sit with their friends. They brainstorm together. They know how to use Google Docs, so they will share their documents and give each other feedback. So this is kind of a busy, exciting, a little bit scary. Today they found out how to pick a word goal, and so that helped with their anxiety a little bit about how long will it have to be. And then when we get to November, the room is deadly quiet, just almost in a creepy way. The first year that we did this, the kids were so distracted by the tapping of the keyboards. I mean, they were so quiet and focused that it was silent in the room. So they asked permission to bring in their earbuds and listen to music, and so we do that. And all of November, that's what they do. They write for homework, they write for classwork. When I approached my principal the first year about doing this, she comes from a science teacher background, and I didn't know if, how she'd feel about, we're just going to turn this into our curriculum. And she didn't even hesitate. She said they'll be writing every day, and that's fabulous. So having her support has really helped quite a bit.
Now, clearly, that I love that image of the room and everyone intensely involved in their writing, which really means they're engaged with the project that they're working on, for them to dive in and maintain that intensity. And they clearly must have a lot of choice in what they write. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, they do. They choose the genre, they develop the characters, they write whatever kind of story they want to write. And the first year that I did this, I was terrified. I have never been much of a story writer myself and have never entertained the idea of writing a novel, and so I haven't taught a lot of story writing, and I was really pretty nervous about it myself. I have been amazed. If a publisher could get a look into what these kids are doing, the ideas that they come up with, they just blow me away. So they have all kinds of freedom, the length, the whole story, the plot line, how they're going to set it all up. But we know that we can't just say, hey, write a story, and then just cut them loose, because they need support to do that. So the workbooks provide a great deal of support that balances out that freedom. I write along with them, and so I share my work in progress and talk about struggles that I'm having as I write. So I can't say enough about the Young Writers Program and the support that gives them, because I would not be able to guide them through this process without that kind of support. So that makes a big difference for all the kids.
Hearing this, all of you going through this together, I know lots of people have an image in their mind of writing as a very solitary thing. We have kind of that picture maybe of a poet in the garret or something like that, alone, struggling with something. You're really pointing out kind of the social aspects, and sharing your own writing, there being in a community of writers. Would you talk a little bit more about that and how that fits with NaNoWriMo, that not solitary piece?
Right, definitely. As I said, we use Google Docs, and so they need to share their doc with a friend. And in fact, before we start writing in November, we set up ways that they can deal with writer's block. So what do you do when you get stuck and you can't disrupt other writers? So they know that they can pop into a friend's doc and help each other that way. I will pop into their document during class so that I can give them help without even interrupting or getting up out of my chair. And then part of the Young Writers Program is a full social network that's set up just for NaNoWriMo, and so the kids create their own profile page. They connect as writing buddies with each other. There's forums there so that they can chat with other students. I've had teachers across the country connect with me there on the Young Writers Program site and say, oh, our principal's supporting NaNoWriMo because we saw the work that you guys have been doing there. So there's a great deal of connection. They actually publish an excerpt on the site. They publish a summary of their novel. They design their own cover. And they can see each other's pages, just like a social network. So they learn how to be online appropriately at the same time. It's a great way to teach digital citizenship at the same time that they're sharing their stories. And then they just have this fabulous audience of their peers, their families. I've had parents who will join NaNoWriMo and write a novel with their kid. You don't see a lot of school assignments where the parents are doing it with them. And then the ultimate audience at the end, if they make it to their word goal in time, then they're able to publish their book for free, a real genuine published copy, and if they want, they can sell it on Amazon. So my kids are actually selling their books on Amazon.
That's fabulous. And I'm also hearing, just to name it, we'll come back to it later, but a lot of craft talk. Kim, I heard it in what you were saying as well, as sort of, Laura, when you say, okay, how are we going to solve this problem of getting help but not interrupting other writers? Or how are we're all makers in this space, we're all creating stuff, it's our workshop area, how do we actually do our work in this community of makers? Heard a bit of that, Kim, from you as well. It's nice to see that carry across the theme, that community aspect. Novel writing, just a last piece, Laura, not writing novels. Of course, in English class, you're probably reading novels as well, but writing novels is a chance for young people to kind of experiment with other worlds and characters and identities and things like that. Would you talk about that element, perhaps?
Sure. They go all over the place. I've had kids write some pretty amazing historical fiction, kids who love to explore times in history. There's always fantasy, there's always zombies and vampires and things like that. But something that's become really powerful is when kids they worry about the rules. They'll say, well, can I write about this, or can I write about that? And they're often surprised to find out that they can write about their own lives, that it's okay to have it be autobiographical. And we've had some kids who've gone through some really difficult times in the past couple of years, some tragic deaths that have occurred, and groups of kids who were affected by it wrote their novels around those stories. And one girl said to me that she had to write her novel about that event because she needed to know how she was going to deal with it in her life. And so they're really discovering the power for them personally, that writing can really help them figure out the world. So so many of them said that they loved coming to English class, that they couldn't wait to write, and they didn't want to stop when November was over, which is, it's hard. We'd love to make it a year-long project, but there's other writing to do. So it's been very, very powerful. Best writing project I've ever seen.
So you've been sharing that in a number of places with other educators, and before we move on to Joe, just give us a picture of where people can see more of what you're doing with NaNoWriMo in your classroom.
Okay, right now I'm working on a 4-part series for Edutopia. So the first part of that just went out in the last week, and that was introducing what NaNoWriMo is. I'll also be blogging there about how to prepare for it and how to assess. How do you assess kids who are writing all these different novels? And how they can publish it when they're done. I also blog about it on my own blog, which is just laurabradley.me. And then I also created a website called nanoteacher.weebly, which is just helping teachers work through the process. The Young Writers Program site is super helpful, and I just added my own piece for teachers who are interested.
That's great. And actually, in honor of Connected Educator Month, we should say that everybody on this program is a very publicly reflective and available teacher, blogging and sharing practice. So we'll be sure to put some of those links also in the chat room so that people can follow up with all of you where you're blogging and posting your work. It's an important theme for Connected Educator Month, how we can connect as adults and learn from each other. But let's keep moving, and let's go up, Joe, to the high school. And actually, there's an interesting segue in that you also have your young people working in a online-powered writing space. It's different than NaNoWriMo, and they're doing writing. But do you hear any resonances, or do you connect with any of these experiences that Laura talked about writing online and having young people write with each other online?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so inspired to know that it's happening in classrooms way younger than the one I teach, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future of high schoolers and how their feelings are about public spaces and writing. So here at Fremont High, what I've seen in the past decade in terms of the approaches to writing are just, tons of great ideas and strategies and traditional approaches. rubric alignment, ways to get the teachers talking about student work and their writing. But where I felt like there was a niche to fill was in the area of audience. Essentially, how do you bring the writing of the students to a more public space beyond peer editing and talking about student work within a department of teachers? So I am truly happy to hear that we've got kids as young as elementary school putting their work online like that. I'm kind of, wow, what that's going to mean for the future is awesome. But this year I do have an all-senior group for both English and creative writing, and a creative writing senior project hybrid course. And so we place heavy emphasis at the 12th grade level, given our push for our students to be college and career ready. Mine are a year away from leaving. So this idea that they have authentic audience and they're being public with their work is really is key to their success later. And they actually, one of the forums which they do this is through their student blogs on youthvoices.net. There are so many blog sites that exist, and I've experimented with so many, but the one that we've tried in my class where we've had the most success with the students feeling like they have an audience that matters has been on the Youth Voices platform. Currently, my students are publishing about their research topics, which all center around a social equity issue. And so being able to blog about their ideas so that folks can offer direction and more questions is a really invaluable part of that research process for them. And they wouldn't get much of that perspective from the kids that are in the room with them or from other teachers on site. It's that perspective from this virtual audience that is key to them writing really meaningful research papers. And I think that's awesome.
So this piece around being connected, and you talked so much of the importance of going public with your work and having an audience, and of course publishing on the internet, blogging, etc. You know it's out there, but it's not necessarily always that you have the experience of being heard or responded to. And I'm just thinking our theme of student voice, that there's a question of whether that voice gets heard and whether somebody takes up the voice, whether the voice is in connection. Would you talk a little bit about this connection theme and how it relates to the audiences on Youth Voices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just getting their voice out there sans the response, I mean, that's the first step. Get your voice out there. The connection, though, is definitely twofold. The students feel connected to the other students that are on this blogging platform as well as to other educators because there is, we look at it as not just posting, but you're actually having some type of an online dialogue so that there are multiple exchanges. So we do place heavy emphasis on students commenting back and forth to other students so that we call it building good karma online so that they can get, just people will want to respond to them. The second connection is what happens to the students' own investment, in particular in their research work. Our students here in Oakland, they do face serious trauma and drama on a daily basis, but because they're so jaded by what they think is the norm, and because most never even leave Oakland, they don't realize that there is a whole world out there that are in awe, can't believe that these kinds of things happen to young people. And that they have these experiences. So the connection is complicated. It's not only the students with their work and the students to other students, but just connecting our audience of students who come from many other places. We have kids in classrooms we're connected to in Utah and New York and Florida. They're not here in Oakland. So what they get to feel connected to here on the West Coast is also very meaningful. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I thought that way of framing connection, both connection to others through the platform, these other students who bring different perspectives from different places, and then connection to your own work, feeling deeply connected to your project, which is often for us as teachers kind of, it's magic when there's that strong investment and connection. Would you talk a little bit about that? Because in some ways, I think we might be thinking, wow, the senior research project. Oh, okay, but your students are really deeply invested in them. Would you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so the reason they're deeply invested in it more so now than they were a month ago when they first heard about it, when there was eye rolling and groans and everything that comes with seniors who are already beginning to be in the throes of senioritis. Now it's different. They're still early in the research process, but so much of what they're posting online on Youth Voices are their questions and their brainstorms and their pre-research about what are very weighty equity issues. And so for previous years, students used their blogs as forums for like posting a change.org petition and wanting it to circulate among other students that are also on Youth Voices. They use it to schedule Google Hangouts with the same people that they're online dialoguing with. Then they're also having a Google Hangout later. So that is one way that we've kind of stepped up the game and brought the conversation into a different space so that it is face-to-face but on a screen. And most importantly, the students use it. I mean, I journal, right? We journal, we talk about process, we talk about how we're feeling. What I love is that the students use their blogs to talk about their process. So I think that there's tremendous value in that, again, for the audience, that if a student is posting and saying, I'm very frustrated with this part of trying to search for these sources and I can't stand that my teacher's making me do this, you suddenly feel like, okay, so I am not alone in this feeling that I have about being frustrated and trying to find my sources for my senior project or what have you. So I think that the process writing has probably been the most valuable type of writing that my students are doing online and the blogs.
And that strikes me as another version of an example, or Laura, to what you said when we have a discussion, what do you do when you have writer's block? Or some of the examples that Kim shared, that a lot of being in this creation of something, in this case a research paper, together and making that visible, not just the final product, but actually being public and connected and engaged through the whole process seems to be a theme that's cutting across really all three of you. Kim, in yours, very much the examples that you gave, a change.org petition, for example, an equity topic, there's a lot of a sense of civic engagement in what your students are doing, and of course they're young adults, they're seniors. Would you talk a little bit about that connection to civic life, Pete?
Yeah, absolutely. The seed of the research that each student does, it comes from an issue. We introduce it as this has to be an issue that burns you up inside, that because they're going to work on it all year long. So they have to have something they're connected to that they'll be interested in. And so, for example, I've had seniors do papers about police brutality and subtopic issues about that, ending exploitation and prostitution of our young people, immigration challenges with higher education. And even though who they're having these online dialogues with might be from a completely different demographic than here in Oakland, they do learn that there is value in hearing all of these multiple perspectives. That the students from Utah, we love you, Utah, with whom they might never associate socially, ever. If you saw sometimes these Google Hangouts where we have kids in uniforms and then you have my students, they would never associate with them socially, that those students can still offer very useful feedback because they're actually not immersed in a similar issue. So there's a level of objectivity that the audience can bring to a student who has such deep personal and passionate connection to their topic as mine do. And I bring up a story, like one of my students who, along with being a student, had to work many, many hours daily. I mean, he was talking about coming home at 1 in the morning after closing the family store. He assumed that the struggles he was facing in balancing work and school were actually the norm because every other one of his friends was also working in their family's store. So some of the students who read his post about the number of hours he worked, they all ended up on a Google Hangout with him. And he was absolutely floored by their sharing that their only job is school and that the only thing their parents required them to do was work hard at being students. And so I watched that hangout, and I felt like his facial expression when the other students dropped that nugget, that bombshell of information on him, it was priceless, because it's an example of how my students need to publish their work. They need to know that the words matter, and where they might gain a sense of tremendous authorship in the publishing, it is also their impact on other people. So those same students who don't come from here, being able to hear that, and an audience is more privileged or part of the same socioeconomic demographic, my students' blogs, they're kind of changing the world and shifting perspectives too in their own small ways. So, again, win-win.
Yeah. Another phrase I love is that art from voice to impact.
Yeah.
They're not the same thing. That's an arc from one to another. Really rich conversations, everyone. We're looking at the last portion of this amazing webinar, and the beautiful thing about Connected Educator Month is that this theme that picks up voice, and we've heard that across everyone. Agency, heard that across everyone, and making. These all are examples of writing, which is something we make, but also really applied to things that are manipulative, though from Kim we heard about the importance of that, the making that we do with our hands and the craft that we create. So all three of those things are themes that we really have an opportunity to talk about all month in this theme of making student agency and student voice. If we could come all the way around back to you, Paul, could you give us a sense of how the rest of the month might unfold around this theme and where we could keep talking about this, because we've only opened up questions and thoughts and responses.
Sure. Yeah, and just to second what you said, what an amazing and rich conversation. I could just sit here and listen to these three talk for hours and hours, and the conversation as well in the chat, which I've tuned into, has been amazingly rich. It's been fantastic. And actually, before I talk about looking ahead, I just wanted to say one quick thing in relation to Joe. I could say, I think, a lot about what everyone has said, but I've had an opportunity to work with Joe over these last couple of years in some of this work in Oakland. And I think a point that was raised earlier about this notion of voice and agency for young people, as well being as much about voice and agency for educators as they are engaging in this practice and these kinds of practices, I think has really been true for me in terms of what I've witnessed with regard to Joe. And I think Joe has been a little bit modest in that she hasn't talked about the ways in which she has leveraged, for instance, opportunities like a weekly webcast called Teachers Teaching Teachers, and the way in which she has taken a leadership role in that. And I think as well the fact that she has engaged in some activities that are these open Google Hangouts, these drop-in Hangouts for her young people, so that they can have conversations with others, any young people around the country who can come in and essentially vet their ideas with one another. And so I think it's really interesting, the dynamic between opening up the possibilities for young people with regard to voice, agency, and making, and the degree to which that has an impact on your own practice, and perhaps even the way your disposition towards some of the possibilities. And I think all of these three amazing educators are witness to that, but I've seen Joe's work firsthand in this way.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and so with regard to what's coming up, I just wanted to say that people can continue to tune into Educator Innovator, and that's a great place to find out different events related to agency voice and particularly making that are coming up. So on October 7th, just around the corner, we have a great webinar planned with regard to this year's Hour of Code. Hour of Code, for those of you who don't know, is an opportunity for young people to be able to to learn how to code, essentially, and to do coding. I know Kim has been involved, and I've just found out that Laura has been involved in Hour of Code in past years. And later in the month, we are going to help a Maker Certificate program launch for educators at Sonoma State University. And then beyond October, in November, an online portion of that Maker Certificate program will be available to educators. We're also, at the end of the month, going to be reporting from the Mozilla Foundation's conference called MozFest, where a number of National Writing Project teachers are actually organizing a track called Build and Teach the Web. So that's exciting. And I just found out that our good friends at CL MOOC, led by a number of people who are actually in the chat, like Karen Fassenpower, are planning a Make a Day during the month of October. And I think we're going to post in the chat Karen's blog post, which is at DigitalIs, and I think explains how people can participate. All these strands are focused on making, as you can probably tell, and I would say if you want to learn more about these opportunities, we're going to post them. We haven't gotten the calendar items up yet, but we're going to post them at Educator Innovator. I would say if you want to stay abreast of these opportunities and then things in the future, we have all kinds of opportunities like this come up at Educator Innovator. Please visit our site at educatorinnovator.org. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and subscribe for our newsletter. And just as vitally, if you want to stay abreast with the most recent information, you can follow us at Twitter at innovates_ed.
So that's fabulous. Thank you. And actually, before we take the very last few minutes to give a last word to each one of our guest educators here. I would want to say that something you mentioned, Paul, just want to emphasize for everyone. All three of our guests today are examples of teachers that are leading very public and connected lives and are also doing the things that they're teaching. So you can find all of them in the blogosphere, and you can see all of them actually practicing the craft that they're trying to also work on with their young people and being a maker and doer and agent in the space. So this piece, which is so true for Connected Educator, that actually we kind of live the world and the being that we would like to bring our young people into, that we're part of making that world. We're not just teaching them to inhabit a future world. We're making the world ourselves as adults right now, that they can join. So that's a really important point that we should think about all month. But in the last minutes, we have just a couple minutes, and I'm just wondering, to close this out, if we could hear one reflection or one question that for each one of you, Laura, Kim, and Joe, that you might want to be thinking about around the theme this month. And let's maybe just go in reverse order that we heard you from. And Joe, if you were to think about one thing this month about voice, agency, and making, what might it be?
Mine would just be, again, my students are early in this game, and I know I heard other folks saying that how do you even get students to want to do this? I'm trying to get as many people as possible to connect online with my kids and respond. That's my goal this month.
Laura.
I keep thinking about how do you get kids to do this if they think they don't have anything to write about, and these kinds of projects, we discover that when we give them that opportunity, plus we give them the support, then they will completely get on board. And so we need to find that balance. How do you give them voice, but how do you also give them support in order to do that?
Kim. And Kim may be frozen.
Am I here? Can you see me or no?
Yes.
There I am? Okay. I know I'm having a little frozen problem, but I was just thinking about even that question that came up earlier about young people not being used to their teachers asking them to use their voices and share their interest. For me, I'm trying to think about how can we transform school so that it's a place where kids actually expect to share their voices and be actively engaged, and it's not really about sitting at desks and filling in spaces and giving right answers. It's really about learning and constructing that through these interactions with other students, with their teachers, and with the larger world. And I think that's really what I'm thinking about a lot right now.
So listeners, we hope that you found this as rich a conversation as we did. I think it was an amazing hour to kick off Connected Educator Month. And please keep logging in, join the Twitter chats and the other events, and remember we should be sharing our questions as much as we share our answers. What a great way to end. Thank you everybody for joining us for this Educator Innovator webinar.
Thanks.
Thank you, Elise. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.